Hi everyone and welcome along. Today we're going to paint a sweet little scene focusing on how to paint people in a lovely sort of simple street scene. It could be a good Valentine's Day card or one for friendship, just sending some love, whatever works for you. So grab your paints and let's get started. Okay, so I've masked down my paper with some washi tape, and the piece of paper itself is, let's see, it is about 6 inches by 8 inches, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw in a horizon line, and I also want to just create a sense of this path. So 2 tapering lines up to the back sort of centre middle, and that's all we need from our pencil. And we're going to wet the page. The reason we've taped it down is so it's going to hold in place when we sort of put quite a bit of water on it. So we've got our mop brush there, which I'm just getting ready, but also we need some colours, so let's get those mixed up before we start our wetting of the page. So I've got some yellow, cadmium yellow mixed up there. Got some cadmium orange. We're going to do a lovely sky, a sort of slightly romantic sky city setting, and then we're going to get some blue tones. Cobalt blue deep is a good one. French ultramarine blue. So wake all these colours up in your palette or similar tones, and Payne's grey there. Okay, so with my mop brush I'm going to wet the page. The beauty of a mop brush is it's just a really good holder of lots of water, and you can get the page covered nice and fast and smoothly. You don't want puddles of water, so you know, I only needed to go back into the jar once I'd put the original application on. And yeah, so what we're going to do is I'm going to use this large size 12 pointed round brush. All these brushes, as well as my usual sort of pointed round set, are available to buy in my shop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my sort of lighter colours, and I'm going to fill the sort of central panel of the page there. And actually I think just a little bit of cadmium red, and as you can see it's just a little bit. In the middle there. And then I'm going to take some blue, cobalt blue deep, and what's important is I'm not going to sort of get too involved with the yellow and orange there. I'm just going to bring it in from the side, see it's not touching it too much. And I'm even going to bring it down here because we're going to have a sort of reflection thing going on. And a little bit of the slightly darker tone. It's a little bit grainy, this colour I've got here, but it's still okay. And last off, some Payne's grey. Now the Payne's grey is going to frame the piece with this dark colour around the edge. Everything dries so much lighter, I find. So it's funny, at the moment it feels like, are we doing a seascape? Well no, we're not. What we are doing though is we are just building up this framing and this sort of up and down mirror image almost, and we are going to let this dry 100%, and you'll notice that when it dries it lightens really quite a lot, which is quite surprising, but once we've got that, then we can start to put in our scene over the top. So the piece now, it's been probably drying for about 5 minutes, and that is naturally drying, not having any heat treatment to speed it up or anything. And it's sort of dry to the touch, but it's not 100% bone dry. And that's what I want really, because what we want to do now is to start placing in some really sort of faint background details. So what I want to do is I want to have a few sort of buildings in the background. So what I'm doing is, so you can see this is rather nice. It's sort of bleeding a tiny bit. So I'm using a brush like angled really low to the page, and I'm using sort of vertical lines and then thinking about the horizon line of my piece, and I'm just sort of placing in these sort of verticals, and I'm going to say horizontals, but when I say horizontal I mean the lines coming sort of out from the horizon, to give a sense of a faint set of buildings. And now also this horizon line here is giving us the sense of these buildings coming downwards as well. They're not just going to sit on the horizon line, but as you can see they're not really much in terms of actual sort of distinct buildings, but that is because we're going to have trees lining in front of them. But I just want something in the distance, and to that end I want to put in sort of buildings off in the distance right at the end as well. So this kind of painting is just a little bit more involved than what we normally do on YouTube, but I really want to give you a sense of some of the things that we do on my Patreon. We take a little bit longer. Sometimes, I mean quite often actually, we paint things in a project that will take a few weeks, and we just go a bit more in depth because we've got the time, and also I know my patrons are very keen to learn specific things that we don't have time for on YouTube. So a lot of the content that we do on Patreon is because it has been specifically asked for by my patrons, and that's one of the benefits of joining up. And of course you can sign up to the different tiers. We've got different benefits and things. Oh, I'm rather pleased with this. It's amazing how you can achieve something really quite impressive and sort of something that's quite clearly a set of buildings or whatever, just from using a sense of perspective and some simple lines. Now what I am going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit more concentrated shadow colour and add that in with a size 0 brush. And of course once that's dried we might add in a little bit more in general, but of course this is just very much our backdrop. And of course we could add in a few sort of slender lines that look a little bit like pylons or aerials or things like that. Okay, so we're going to let this dry and then we're going to start to add our trees. Now I'm going to bring in my rigger brush as well for this, and some of my smaller, more detailed brushes, so I'll move some of those off. Okay, so trees wise, what we're going to do is we're going to use these lines now for the sort of placement of our trees, and I'm going to paint them in this lovely sort of browny shadowy colour. And well, I think I'll just go straight in with the rigger brush. Actually, it's such a good brush for like slender branches and things. And so our trees in the background, going to be soft. We're sort of going to not see a huge amount of detail, but we are going to see the faintness of the shape. And so once I've got that central trunk in, and you can see how the trunk still sort of bleeded out a little bit on the front of the, on top of the slightly wet wash behind it, and that's kind of good because I just want it all to be really nice and sort of faint, I suppose. The rigger brush is a brush that I'm fairly new to, but it's just been probably one of my favourite brushes in terms of things it's allowing me to do. It's one of the best sellers in my shop as well. So yeah, it's well worth getting one. I'm just going to carry on now and painting in another tree along this avenue, and you can see things are still going to bleed in a little bit. That's all fine. It's all helping with the general sort of rather dreamy, hazy sense of this piece. And as my trees sort of come down here, they're going to get bigger, so they're going to get taller, bigger as they come in to the fore. And then also we will be adding more definition to the colour. So that's why we don't worry about things bleeding into one another at this point. You can see the branches are created by coming off that central trunk and then adding one or two little ones to the main trunk, and then as you get towards the bottom of the tree, just a sort of maybe an extra little one or something. I'm not entirely sure what these trees are in my painting, but I don't mind. So yeah, just gonna keep going, and a little bits of unpainted space on the trunk are all good. And of course, as I'm painting, the backdrop is just drying that little bit more each time. If you don't have a rigger brush, you can just use one of your smaller detailed pointed round brushes like a 4/10. But what I do love about the rigger is it gives you that wonderful sort of natural wobble that the hand isn't always as good at because of the long languid bristles on this style of brush. So as we're getting down to the sort of foreground, you can still see the rigger brush is still brilliant because it can sort of drag and create a thicker line, and in doing so we get a wonderful sort of dry brushing effect as well. And the branches are also going to be sort of coming off the side of the page and really towering upwards. We're trying to fill the space, and what's good is the piece is sort of naturally drying behind me as I continue to paint branches and things. So it's quite clever that as I go, not only the trees in the foreground are more distinct, but the background, which was making these ones a bit softer at first, has dried enough for these ones to be nice and crisp. So it's a bit of a sort of timing thing. Watercolour, there's a lot of thought that goes into that kind of stuff as well, but we're still painting with these this sort of dilute colour. So you can see we've got two trunks here that maybe just off, or they might be just coming in. I quite like the idea of the framing working like that. Okay, now I don't know about you, but it looks a bit eerie and a bit cold. Not particularly romantic right now. We're going to sort that out in a second. Now, I think really the magic of spring and autumn in the city with the trees is the most effective, exciting sort of visual look. And I've chosen actually to go with this blue palette so that I can contrast it with a lovely orangey red of autumn leaves, which is just going to mean this lovely sort of glow coming off this rather sort of somber, muted piece at the moment. So what we're going to do now is a few things. I'm first going to sort of put in a little bit of extra details on the ground, and I want to get a sense of a wet ground, so we're going to have a little bit of reflection as well from everything. So I'm just mixing up more colour here. Now what I'm not going to worry too much about is having like re-wetting the bottom of the piece, because we can achieve sort of reflections quite easily without needing sort of another wash going on. So I'm going to take my larger brush, and instead of sort of using the mop brush, just wet it all with water and then bring stuff in, I can be a bit more intentional. So I'm going to use the lines there for a bit more of a sort of pavement effect. And you can see it really doesn't matter about sort of how precise or detailed you are. I mean, this is a size 8 brush, for heaven's sake. And then now I'm going to take my size 2 brush, and I'm going to paint in on the dry page these reflections. So that is by using the brush angled very low to the page and just sort of scrubbing back and forth, and then just adding a sort of vertical line downwards. In the background, we'll just have a few little sort of low angled reflections like that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to add little bits of colour and a bit more sort of interest and freshness to the actual piece itself. So cadmium orange and cadmium yellow are nicely opaque, and I'm going to begin with my sort of trees in the front, and I'm going to just dab a size 2 brush sort of slightly chaotically over the top, sort of almost clustering around the branches, maybe extending a bit further. So I'm beginning with my trees in the foreground with this, and I'm going to gradually move my way back. So you can see how the leaves sort of get smaller and softer and fainter as we go to the back. And what I've also done is I've got some much more concentrated shadow mix here, because now, it's my favourite bit, we're going to add a little bit of detail to at least the trees in the foreground. And I've got my just a size 0 brush. I mean, you could go smaller. In fact, I might go smaller just so I can, yeah, just so I can really get the little bits. But you can see here that by adding in these really nice bits of darker contrast, and I'm making sure I'm trying anyway to not paint over the orange, and also you can add in extra little bits, which is kind of fun, because I find when I'm painting trees I sort of reach my limit with how many branches I can paint without it feeling like I've just sort of lost my sense of direction, I guess. Because when you have highlights in terms of the nice bright orange leaves, you need lowlights as well to really make the most of that contrast. So I'm going to be putting in this darkness definitely for the first two trees, but it'll be obviously a bit more delicate and a little bit less extensive than the first one. And then obviously do it on the other side too, and we've got the ones that are just sort of off camera here, off canvas. And then the other thing I want to do, because we are in a city, is those sort of little tree, sort of the base, the little sort of, I don't know, paving sections you get around the bases of trees in cities. So we're just going to place those in. So that's with using the strong colour, and then just cleaning the brush off, and then I can still do them on the ones further off, but they're just a little bit less defined. And I think, yeah, just a little bit of maybe up the trunk, but not so much on the rest of the branches. And that also means that I will just add the tiniest bit of extra darkness into the reflection we've got going on there. So we're getting towards the sort of climax of the piece where we're going to pop the people in, and then it's going to suddenly all be done. But what I am doing is I'm just adding a bit of burnt sienna lowlights to some of these leaves in the foreground. Which I just think also just adds that little bit more. Okay, so finally some people. So what I want to do is I want to sort of just place in two figures. I'm going to do a man and a woman for this sake, just because we can learn about these sort of two slightly differently dressed shapes. So I've got these sort of two sort of box shapes, which are going to be the torsos, and then two little rectangles for the sort of pelvis, bottom half, and then from there we're going to have the legs coming out from the bottom. Now, my patrons have done all sorts of people drawing like this, and so if you feel like this is a something you're quite interested in learning more about, then this might be a really good time to come and join us and get more out of it. I think we've got to have a dog being walked, because I just think that's got to be in there. So a little shape down there. We're just putting in some boxy shapes, and then I think a nice umbrella. Okay, let's go then. So I'm going to, what colour am I going to use? I'm going to use a bit of alizarin crimson, I think, and maybe sort of just a little bit of a brown, a little bit of alizarin crimson mixed together to make a nice sort of overcoat for our chap. So I'm going to, with my size 0 brush, I'm going to sort of paint in a blocky, sort of slightly, that lump on the top is sort of where the shoulders come up to meet the neck, and I'm just sort of I'm trying to do it as sort of simply as possible. We don't want to see too much, and then we're going to have long coat, so I'm going to just place in a little bit of shadow in there. And then we'll have our girl in a blue. And then we'll just see her sort of elbow there, because she's going to be holding the umbrella upwards. I'm actually going to have her in this is going to be a dress rather than a full-on coat. And then we'll have them sort of blended together just a little bit, and then I'm just going to use, because it's also quite dark and shadowy, and they're sort of walking in this low light, then the legs will be just sort of blended down into not very much. They sort of come down to nothing really. Tapering off into very little. But you can see these shapes are sort of making sense. The legs sort of seem to just taper off into nothing. I go into a lot more detail of this in my Patreon, so I'd highly recommend, if you're interested in this kind of painting, to come along and join us over there, because we have loads of time to discuss all these kinds of things, and this is just a nice little taster really. Okay, and then we'll do a little doggy. And again, we're just keeping it simple. Now, one thing we do need to do is make sure we've got a reflection for these two. So what I'm going to do is just take some of that faint sort of shadowy mix and begin by just taking that colour down and bleeding it in, and then I'm going to take a tiny bit of the colours and then I'm going to finish it off with a few leaves on the ground. Well, we need to do her umbrella as well, don't we? Okay, nearly finishing it off. Okay, so for her umbrella, a little bit of a dark colour. I'm going to paint it in the sections. And there we go. So that is something, a little bit of a sort of slower, longer form piece for you to really get your teeth into. And like I say, if you enjoyed this kind of thing and want to paint like this more, then join us on Patreon, because we've got all sorts of tutorials where we just go into a little bit more detail than we can do all the time on YouTube. And of course, if you fancy painting this and giving it to your love for Valentine's Day, then everyone's a winner, aren't they? There we go. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that one. And if you liked that style of painting, head over to my Patreon to find out all about the tutorials we've got on there that go into way more detail than we have time for on YouTube. So the details are in the episode notes below. I want to say a massive thank you to my patrons for their support, because that support enables us to keep creating videos like these that everyone can enjoy. If you enjoyed this one, hit the like button and comment below to let me know how you got on with it. And of course, if you never want to miss another video, then hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell, and we'll see you again next time. Bye!